Hi everyone, welcome to An Hour with LawSikho. This is Ramanuj this side, and with me today I have Ayusmita. Welcome, Ayusmita.
Hi.
So before we begin, why don't you introduce yourself? You have been working on surrogacy laws quite a bit, but you also have professionally you do other things as well, of course, as a lawyer, and you are working with a law firm. Why don't you, to start with, introduce yourself?
Sure. So I am Ayusmita and I graduated from ILS Law College in 2016. Right after that, I went for my LLM to Cornell, and I have come back to India and I'm working with the dispute resolution team of Shardul Amarchand in Bombay. So my tryst with surrogacy actually has been pretty brief. It started only when I joined Cornell, and I was a part of this human rights clinic where basically you studying and research on a particular topic. So that's when my association and interest in surrogacy started. And the timing was also such was when the surrogacy bill had just been tabled and there were call for suggestions. So the clinic actually had about just 2 Indians, and the rest of the clinic were all Americans. And so it was basically like, we tried to compare Indian as well as laws so that we can get a better understanding of what the lacunae were in the Indian bill compared to surrogacy in the United States, because as we know, like the 50 states of the US have different laws when it comes to governing surrogacy. So that's how it really started. And since then, I've been keeping an active check on the progress that the bill has been making. So recently, as we know, there were a lot of amendments which were suggested after the call for after the bill was tabled. So very recently, the cabinet has approved those amendments as well. So right now, we're just waiting for exactly when the bill is going to be passed. So that's my little tryst with surrogacy.
You can tell us more about your experience with with your legal career so far as well.
Okay, so I'm a third generation lawyer, and during my entire 5 years in law school, I tried to get a little bit of experience with all the different kinds. So I did an internship with a senior counsel. Then I also had a small tryst with law firms as well as in-house. And so my father is he's a solicitor, so I always knew somewhere that I wanted to get into active litigation, go to court. So towards the end of my 4th and 5th year, I just started interning with law firms so that I get a basic idea of exactly the kind of work that I want to do. And so when I came back, I always knew I wanted to come back to India and work here. So even when I started applying to law firms, I applied to actually a varied kind of law firms. I applied to smaller law firms, the tier 1 firms. I even considered joining a council, but then I realized that I wanted a little bit of exposure to all fields. So I decided to be very honest, it was a very personal decision not to join a council and to join a law firm. But yeah, so I ended up applying to a couple of places, and then it's only been a year, so I'm not going to preach about how to get into a law firm and like all the good things. But then, yeah, so far my trust has been pretty good with the law firm, and let's see how it goes.
So, what sort of work do you get to do in a law firm?
So an average day at SAM would start with us like the regular checking our emails, replying to emails. So though SAM as a firm is really big, we have our dispute resolution team. Like my team is only about like 6 or 7 people. So when we get, and also my partner recently became a partner only 2 years back. So we are a relatively new team. So how it works is when we get a client, we start from the very basics. So we start from making like meeting the client for the first time to getting papers. First start with making a strategy note of what the way forward is. So, we give different kinds of scenarios about whether, we actually advise whether you should go into litigation, whether it should be settled at some kind of an amicable settlement, whether arbitration, considering whether they have an arbitration agreement or not, go forward with an arbitration. We do a lot of advisory work as well. So we have a lot of foreign clients who enter into contracts with Indian entities. So we do a lot of advisory work for them as well. We do a little bit of insolvency work. Our primary chunk is that of arbitration, but we have a lot of other court matters that are going on as well. We get good exposure in terms of attending these arbitration proceedings, briefing councils, attending all the conferences that we do with the senior councils, other councils that we brief in Bombay, etc. So that's like how an ordinary day looks. We actually, even though I'm a first year associate, I've also traveled with my partner to attend meetings and brief clients, even in different cities. So in terms of exposure, it's great. Even though I'm a fresher and only 1 year into the profession, ever since I think 6 months into the profession, I was already traveling with my partner and attending client meetings and all of that. So in terms of exposure, it's been really great.
So, what is your so today's topic is of course surrogacy laws. So let's jump right into that. Uh, so, what is the current state of surrogacy laws in India? You told us that there is a bill pending and going.
Yes.
It's in the process of legislation. How likely is it that we are going to see this law before the next election?
Uh, it's looking quite good, because even the amendments that were proposed to the regulation bill have been cleared by the Union Cabinet. So as of now, it's looking quite good. And I have a feeling that things are looking up before the elections come. But we can only keep our fingers crossed, because even now there is a lot of debate that is happening about a lot of lacunae which is still in the bill. There are a lot of NGOs which are still trying to lobby against some things which are missing and which are fundamental and should be present in the surrogacy bill. So basically, if we start talking about the surrogacy bill, like we know, India had this the entire surrogacy industry in India was completely unregulated, because of which it became a hub for foreigners as well as Indians, film artists, celebrities to come to India to avail these surrogacy services. The primary reason being, one, that it was regulated, and two, also that it was really cheap to come to India to do to meet surrogates, as well as have them agree to carry on the process at a very low cost. Most of the surrogates in India, compared to countries abroad, it works a little differently, because in while abroad you have a lot of military wives and a lot of women from good families agreeing to be surrogates, whether commercial or altruistic. In India, it does not work the similar way. So most of the surrogates in India are those from the really low levels of society who are doing it because they are in need of money. So you would get some anywhere between 3 to 6, sometimes even 9 lakhs, depending upon whether it's a foreign couple who is approaching the surrogate or an Indian couple who is approaching the surrogate. So that's how it really started. Then we had various instances of film stars availing the services of a surrogate. It is argued it's because they didn't want to spoil their figure for any other such reason, but we don't really know why exactly they took surrogates, which is why finally, after a lot of debate, a lot of feminists arguing for as well as against surrogacy, we had the bill which was tabled. So, I mean, if you really want to go into criticizing the bill, so like we know, for everyone who's watching this right now and who, if you do not have an idea, so basically what the bill does is...
We'll go into that a little later, Ayusmita.
Sure.
Can I ask you first that, okay, there is a bill which is tabled in the parliament, but besides that, what is right now governing the industry and the practice of surrogacy in India? And also, I want to know from you, like, how big is this industry really in India?
Okay, so the surrogacy industry in India is actually one of the biggest industries prevalent in terms of the surrogacy industry. Like I told you, one of the major reasons for that is because it is completely unregulated right now. It is absolutely unregulated, and there are no surrogacy laws per se, or any law that actually governs the child that is born of surrogacy, or even that of the term earlier would be that we would use would be commissioning parents, because it was done for a certain amount of money. But as per the bill now, it is only altruistic, so we would call them intending parents. No law that governs the child that is born through surrogacy, no law that governs that of the intending or the commissioning parent, and no law that governs the right of the surrogates. So of course we have like all the fundamental rights that govern the rights of the child and the rights of the mother, etc. But there was no regulating law which governed the entire industry, because of which it was much easier for people to come in, as well as Indians here, to expand and, I would say, exploit or empower, however you want to see it, the surrogacy industry in India.
Got it. So, what is it about the like? Why do we need a bill right now? Like, if there's already a regulation in place, and I believe that the Home Ministry has like some directives about who can get visa to come and for surrogacy purposes to India. So, can you throw some light on these things?
Sure. So the main thing that this bill seeks to do is protect the interests legally, as one would colloquially say, of the surrogate as well as of the child as well as of the intending parents, because it is largely unregulated. So the main argument that was put forward while the bill was being drafted was that there are the two ways you can look at it. One, that you are either empowering women, especially women of the lower classes in India, who are agreeing to be surrogate women by giving them money. So you should have a sort of mechanism in place which helps them secure their rights. And the other argument was that you are exploiting women because you are actually using these women as a baby producing machine and offering them money and buying their services. So this was the other argument that was used. Also, since, like I explained, because the surrogacy industry in India became so rampant and we had foreigners and people from different parts of the world coming in because it was much cheaper to have a surrogate, have your child in India, as well as also coupled with the fact that the medical services in India are pretty good compared to the other countries. There was the need to regulate this sector because it was becoming extremely prevalent. And a lot of news not throwing very good light on India was also coming into the picture, which is why it was becoming very important to finally regulate this sector. We always have debates about what's going on in the US about this. So there was a lot of criticism that the Indian government isn't doing much to protect the rights of the surrogate, as well as especially those women who are agreeing to become surrogates. A lot of this was also propelled by these celebrities
Please,
who...
Yeah, hello.
I'm sorry, I lost you there.
Yeah, we lost you as well because of some internet problem. Can you just repeat what you said in the last few seconds?
Yeah, sure. So one of the other reasons that also propelled this was a lot of news came to light about celebrities having babies through surrogacy, and there was no real reason. So no one really knew why exactly. They seemed healthy, they seemed fit, they seemed to just have been married, but they were still going ahead and having babies through surrogacy. So that kind of put a very bad light that there are so many couples who are actually infertile and unable to have a baby because they are unable to give that kind of money to commission a surrogate to have a baby. Whereas there are these celebrities who are they seem perfectly fit. Of course, everything seems very prima facie because you don't really know the reason why they went ahead and had a baby through a surrogate and not conceived naturally. But there was a lot of debate fueling around that as well, that what exactly was the reason. So a lot of these reasons coupled together made, I think, and it was high time because this industry has been prevalent in India ever since the 1990s. So it's almost been unregulated for like 25 to 28 years now, that it has been completely unregulated. This was pending and it has come in at a very good time. And yeah,
So what is the how like, again, to come back to it, you said it's very big, and if you give us the reasons why it is so big, but how big is it really? Is it in terms of, say, billions of dollars? Like, is it millions of dollars, billions of dollars? How big is it?
I mean, it's difficult to quantify because we don't really have any authoritative data which will tell us, but I would assume it's $1 billion industry.
Okay, so what exactly is the argument against somebody who is able to have a baby? They actually going to a surrogate mother and having a baby through a surrogate mother. What is the moral argument against this?
So I'll actually like to delve a little bit into the bill, and then after that, it will be easier to answer a lot of these questions, if that's okay with you.
That's absolutely fine.
Okay, so basically what this bill does is that it prohibits commercial surrogacy, and what it does is it promotes altruistic surrogacy. So now the main difference between the two is, like you can understand by the term, commercial is when you actually pay a certain sum of money to a woman to bear the child for you, whereas in case of altruistic surrogacy, it is only a good service, you can say, that the surrogate is doing by bearing your child and giving birth to that child. So what this bill has done now has said that firstly, no foreign nationals will be allowed to come in and avail surrogacy services in India. So the bill applies only to Indian citizens. Of course, it says that it applies only to married couples, so that rules out a live-in couple or even the LGBTQ community from availing the services of a surrogate. I'll come into my arguments both for and against that, as well as the drawbacks of the bill a little later. So what it says is basically is that only a close relative of the intending couple can bear a child for you. Now, what that means is that only a family member from the girl side or the boy side can bear the child for you. The bill does not define what the close relative is, but it just says close relative. It puts down a lot of conditions and preconditions in terms of who can be a surrogate, and also when an intending couple can actually approach a surrogate to have a baby via surrogacy. So it says that in case of a surrogate, they've made very stringent laws as to who can be qualified to be a surrogate. So it says that firstly, a woman who has to have been married at some point of time, who has to have a child or children of her own, and also they specify certain age limits. The same applies even for the intending couple. So there is a certain age limit that is given, that the woman has to be between this and this age, the man has to be between this and this age. It also says that you should have been infertile for at least 5 years before you can actually go and approach a surrogate to have a baby for you. And also it states that if you already have a child, a child who you have conceived, whether naturally or adopted or via surrogacy, then you are not entitled to avail the services of a surrogate. So these are the basic conditions that they have laid down. Now, as far as the regulatory framework is concerned, they have set up surrogacy regulation boards, both at the center as well as at the state level. There will be authorities which will be basically giving you a certificate in the first place, one certifying whether you are eligible to be a surrogate. So not only are there preconditions, like I already stated, there are certain mental as well as psychological and biological tests that are going to be conducted on the intending surrogate mother before she's actually given an okay certificate to go ahead and be eligible to act as a surrogate. The same goes for the intending couple. They are given certificates from these authorities to certify that, okay, you are actually infertile, you have proven infertility, you have been married for 5 years and you are unable to conceive a child, and now you can go ahead and you have the sanction of the state to go ahead and implant the egg in a surrogate and go ahead with your surrogacy. So that's how the entire regulatory framework works. So I'm sorry, you had asked me a question, Ramanuj. If you can repeat that question, I'll like to answer that now.
I can hear you. Yeah, please proceed.
Yeah, is there any?
Am I audible?
Yeah, sure. Is there any other question that you want me to answer regarding the bill?
Yeah, sure. So I find this bill to be extremely conservative, and it seems like like it's completely it's basically trying has been, and there are a lot of issues, for example, and basically it is for single mothers who may want to have children. It's not possible. Basically, it is very marriage focused, and it is restricting the choices of a lot of people. So do you see some constitutional issues there?
Absolutely. So if you want to start talking about the drawbacks of the bill, I can list a dozen of them. The first being, my very first problem with this bill is that while I am absolutely okay and I see why the Indian government would try to regulate and do away with commercial surrogacy and promote altruistic surrogacy, my problem is with the fact that they have limited this altruistic surrogacy only to family members. Now, we're talking about a country like India, and not to reinforce stereotypes, but a woman's it's considered her moral duty to have child rearing and bearing functions. So when you're saying and you're limiting it to an altruistic surrogacy, you're basically putting the other women in the family who are able to conceive a child in a very tight spot, because you're talking about either the sister-in-law or the sister or some very close relative of the intending couple and not really giving them a choice. Because if she sees that her brother or her sister is unable to conceive a child, seeing them, battle infertility and knowing that she's the only hope for that family to have a genetically related child, I don't see how that is giving her a free choice or free consent for that matter, uh, in terms of having to bear that surrogate child. So that is my first problem with the bill. There are many other problems. The other being, it's completely outside the purview of live-in couples as well as the LGBTQ community. I mean, of course, while we're still awaiting the decision on the 377, and I think India has a long way to go. So, I mean, we can only keep our fingers crossed that the 377, the decision as and when it comes out, would be favorable at some point, and thereafter the surrogacy bill will go through some sort of an amendment to include them in this bill. But as of now, that is another huge issue that is there. Another very big problem with this bill is it does not deal with secondary infertility, and it is only allowing couples to have a child once. So now my main problem with that is that the right to procreate and the right to bear a child is your personal discretion. The state cannot be governing that aspect of your life. So when you're telling me that you already have a child and you are not allowed, and I'm unable to conceive again, you're not allowed to have a second child because the surrogacy laws say so, that does not make any sense to me. So there are a lot of couples who very easily have the first child, but they are unable to conceive the second time around. Secondary infertility is actually extremely common in today's world because of the lifestyles that everyone is leading. Like, there are women who are getting married much later, they are conceiving much later. So there's a lot of age gap. There's, between their first child when they actually want to have their second child. So you cannot completely do away with secondary infertility and say that, okay, you can only have a surrogate baby if you don't have a child from before. I mean, there's an exception in the bill which says that, yeah, unless you have a child that suffers from a mental condition or from an life-threatening disease, you can go ahead and have a baby through surrogate. I think it is extremely unfair for the state to dictate exactly how many kids you can have. That's my other problem with the bill. Other than that, if we come into the arguments about empowerment versus exploitation, I feel like there is a huge problem with the state trying to regulate this surrogacy industry, because as soon as you say that we are trying to regulate the industry because, there are people who are coming in and paying women money to avail their services of their womb, as they call it, you're actually kind of implying that they are not rational enough to make their own decisions to bear a child. So I have a huge issue with that as well, because it becomes an employment versus exploitation debate. So whereas any other form of manual labor is not frowned upon, even when women are like going through extremely strenuous conditions, for example, in the cement industry, building industry, etc., you're comparing labor there, and that's okay if they go through all of that hard mental labor, both physical as well as mental, earning a meager amount of money, but you're not okay with her making an informed decision of doing this by herself for whatever monetary cost that it may be. So that is another issue with this bill itself. So of course, I mean, it is a very conservative bill, I agree with you. And there has been no changes and no amendments that have been made even more recently in March deal with any of that. But that's how it is that it stands today.
What do you think is the motivation of this bill? Like, why is it so conservative? Like, what is going on here? Like, what's the influence that makes it so conservative? Because I think around the world, there will be very few places where you would have such a conservative view about surrogacy. In fact, in many countries, they are changing the laws to make it more liberal.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I can't really comment on what the background is for such a conservative bill. But I mean, this is very much in the fact of excluding, the LGBTQ communities is in keeping with the 377 that was passed. So, I mean, that is, I guess, I wouldn't say the prevalent mindset, but the policy decisions are all based around that. A very conservative, only married couples unable to conceive. I don't know where they got the, I mean, I understand that they want to prohibit commercial surrogacy. There are a lot of states in the United States that do that as well, but nowhere in no country which prohibits commercial surrogacy do they restrict the altruistic surrogacy to only that of relatives. So even in the states in the US where they completely prohibit commercial surrogacy and only allow for altruistic surrogacy, nowhere does it restrict it only to family members. So you also have like
That is a big
friends.
question. What if I don't have a family member who's actually in a position to bear a child?
Absolutely, absolutely, and
People have like
absolutely.
people are growing up in nuclear families. The reality is that you don't have sisters or other people around you who are in your family who can bear a child, and even if they can, why would they? I mean, they may not want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I mentioned a few minutes ago, that it kind of also puts them in a very difficult situation, because in an Indian family where you are the only hope for the couple to have a child, that's kind of pressurizing that person absolutely to the hilt, because they don't have any other option but to agree. I don't know how that is not duress, whereas you're saying that any other, okay, fine, woman from a lower rung of the society is doing this for money, and that is duress. I don't know how the government is not weighing in these factors. So you're absolutely right when you say that.
What I think is that people won't be able to, like, more than anything else, they would not find a surrogate and they'll not be able to have a baby. It's basically, in effect, you are restricting them from having children, despite the medical.
Or Ramanuj, the other thing that I was actually coming to is that by having such a stringent bill, what you're actually doing it is promoting an underhand industry. So there is going to be the surrogacy industry as prevalent as it was before, but it's just going to be underground and completely regulated. So absolutely losing the entire point of having this bill in the first place. Because there will be so many situations, because of so many issues that are there in this bill, in terms of not being able to conceive the second child through surrogacy, not being having to have 5 years of infertility, having to have a family member be a surrogate for you. There are so many issues with this bill. I completely see this becoming an underground black industry and people doing it anyway. So I see the whole point of this bill getting lost.
I think that, large number of Indians are going to go to other countries and have surrogate children, because it is not illegal to have surrogate children. Like, you can
Absolutely.
have, but you will just go to another country where the law doesn't stop the doctors from performing those procedures. In India, you are stopping the doctor from performing the procedure, and people will go to other countries and they'll have children.
So the problem with that, Ramanuj, is that, like I said, the reason that everyone came to India was that it was extremely economical to have to conduct the entire process of surrogacy. So I mean, every time that you implant the egg to create the embryo, it's not always a sure shot that the surrogate mother will conceive. So the entire process is not only extremely expensive but also extremely time consuming and arduous. So it might not be very feasible for a middle or a lower middle class family in India to go to the United States or any other country where surrogacy is conducive to have a surrogate baby, because in the US it is extremely expensive to do that. It is extremely expensive to do that. So in a way, you're actually also taking away the right of all those couples in India who would have otherwise able to have a baby through surrogacy in India, but are not being able to do it now because they can't have it in India and they can't have it abroad because they don't have enough finances to fund the entire process abroad. So that is another huge issue with the bill right now.
So with a globalized economy, the situation is such that if an industry is like this kind of thing, especially, is prohibited in one country, it just simply will move to another country.
Absolutely.
There will be some Caribbean island, or there will be some, maybe Vietnam or Cambodia. Somebody will find this an opportunity, and perhaps our Indian doctors will go and set up their clinics with their already have the expertise they have, and simply just move to a different destination. And yes, you are right that most Indians won't be able to probably afford that at that point, but it will go on, and there will be people who will afford it. So it is basically a restriction on the people who could afford it in India. Now they cannot afford it, so they will be the ultimate people suffering out of this, and also perhaps the women who are actually looking at this as a possible way to earn money.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, where do you see, like, I mean, I was just checking after asking you the question. It seems that the Indian surrogacy industry was in excess of 400 millions in 2016, when I think they started regulating this through visa controls. And so, basically, do you see that? I'm sure, given the restrictions, it will come down to a fraction of that. Would you say so?
Absolutely. It definitely will, because now, like I already said, so this was the valuation when foreigners also used to come in and fund, not fund, fund is the wrong word to use, used to come in to have the babies and pay the surrogates. So now, not only are you looking at half a fraction only because it's going to be altruistic surrogacy, also because the entire commercial aspect has been done away with, in addition to the fact that foreigners cannot even come into the country to have a baby through surrogacy. So in a sense, this industry is going, the revenues, as you can say, from this industry is going to be absolutely negligible. I mean, on the face of it, it is going to be. But like I said, I don't see it actually implementing how the bill supposes it to, because it's definitely going to have an industry where there are going to be the women from the absolute lower rungs being paid to carry these babies. And then that is going to be completely unregulated as well. So you're right that that entire amount is definitely going to be slashed by half. Also because it's going to be very difficult for foreigners now actually to come in and to commission a surrogate to have their baby. So that's one of the primary reasons why there will be a absolute like slash in that value for sure.
Yeah, so I think the industry is going to move to other countries. Even the doctors would have to do so. So if this is the situation, how do you see that this law, once it is actually put into place? So far, it is not there, right? So far, commercial surrogacy is not banned as such in India. Once the law comes into play, obviously things will change. But how do you see this actually holding up in a court of law, like if it is challenged in the Supreme Court also, which it is likely to be because a lot of commercial
Absolutely.
interest is affected.
Absolutely. Not just commercial interests, but I would also say there are a lot of, like I said, a lot of fundamental problems with this. So I can say for sure there are going to be a lot of activists for the LGBTQ community arguing against this bill, because like I said, so whereas when you're talking about a lesbian couple, it'll be easy for them to have an egg of one woman implanted in the other. So the one will be the birth mother and the other will be the genetic mother, and having some sort of a relation. But how do you deal with the gay couples? I mean, firstly, you've completely excluded the purview of the LGBTQ from this. So I definitely see a lot of arguments for that. But then I think that will have to wait till we have the final decision on 377 as well. That is one of the biggest problems. And also, I see a huge problem with the altruistic surrogacy being confined only to family members. Also, especially because it hasn't been defined in the bill. So, who really is a close relative? The bill does not define that. So there are a lot of things which I foresee, a lot of constitutional arguments, even in terms of the rights of women and the right of women to enter. Like, why can it not be okay? So also, let's talk about another thing. When we're talking about not paying any money to a surrogate, not commissioning the surrogate mother, you are paying her the reasonable medical expenses. And the current amendment also talks about giving a certain amount of insurance coverage to make sure that that she has no if there are any complications post the pregnancy, that is taken care of. If the child is born with any sort of a deficiency or needs to be kept in the NICU or the incubator, the intending parents pay for that. So there are a lot of all of these. But how do you regulate? I mean, if you're talking about within the family, how do you regulate in any case the couple, like, gifting a house or like gifting like any other thing to that particular woman of their family? So when you're talking about it not being actually commercial, that's not how it really stands. And also, when you're saying you legally don't enter into a contract, so that's the main thing. So like, whereas the states in the US, you enter into a surrogacy contract, which are actually vetted by solicitors from both the parties. So you have an advocate for the surrogate mother and you have an advocate for the intending parents who enter into a contract. There are terms and conditions, there are negotiations, people agree on the amount of money, visitation rights. There are a lot of other things that come into play. So in India, because it's an altruistic surrogacy, there is no contract per se. So I would also think that what would you do if a parent, if a woman in your family agrees to bear your child for you, but does not give you that child back, and does not agree to, to actually give you the child when the child is born? I mean, while there are a lot of arguments against this, and they would say that, it's not genetically related to that mother who is bearing the child, because we have mostly done away with the concept of traditional surrogacy, where the egg of the gestational mother is used. So you use the sperm of the father and the egg of the mother and implant it in the surrogate mother. So genetically, the child might not be related, but there are so many arguments, so many feminists argue that you don't really know before you are pregnant with a child what your feelings will be once that child is born. So another very big issue with this entire bill is, if you're restricting it to altruistic surrogacy and there is no contract, how do you regulate the rights of that surrogate mother? Of course, you're protecting her rights in terms of her medical needs, etc. But what about other rights that she can have in relation to the child, some of which is given? So in other foreign countries, there are many a times visitation rights have been given to such surrogate mothers. I'm not saying that, especially if they're related, of course that parent will that the surrogate mother will have rights to go visit the child, but I'm talking about legally protecting her rights in terms and her relation with that child. So there are a lot of arguments in terms of that as well.
Okay, the one major problem I see is that if somebody has to be a surrogate mother for like almost a year, they are not able to work. I suppose, like, let's say they are not able to carry on normal work. They may not be able to go to their work offices or whatever they're doing. And don't you think that a compensation is very natural? And I mean, I think it's unnatural and strange that you cannot compensate. They cannot ask for compensation for that.
Absolutely. So that's what I said. So that's the biggest issue with them restricting it to altruistic surrogacy of a family member, because this is nothing but duress. So not only are you in a way compelling her to bear this child for you, because they have no other way of having a genetically related child, and we all know the importance of the Indians feeling that they should have a genetic related child, and rightly so. I mean, of course, there are so many arguments which people make that, okay, why can't you go and adopt? Absolutely, but that does not take away the right of intending parents to want to have a genetically related child. So that's another very big problem with this bill, that no sort of compensation. So if any sort of it seems as if any sort of amount is exchanged between the intending parents and the surrogates, or if anything, it doesn't go it actually kind of says that there'll be imprisonment up to 10 years. There can be fine up to 10 lakhs if all the compliances are not met with, if the requisite authority certification has not been taken, etc. So there are a lot of problems with that. So whereas in the US, you have a lot of, there are a lot of states that ban commercial surrogacy, but requisite amount of a reimbursement, as they call it, is given to her for her services. So like, suppose, you have a surrogate who is bearing your child for you, and she has left her job for a period of 1 year or maybe more, you pay her the entire amount that she has lost, that she could have earned if she was doing a job. If she already has children and she needs a babysitter now or a nanny to take care of the child because she's pregnant and unable to take care of the child, you provide for reimbursements in terms of that nanny. And there are many such other facilities that are actually given to the surrogate. Nothing of that seems to have been mentioned here. So now we can't really say how in practicality this bill is going to play out. I mean, I actually want to see, once it is implemented, how it works out, and the different ways that people find around this bill to actually go ahead and have babies via surrogacy. It's going to be very interesting to see that. And also the different types of arguments that people are going to take both for and against this bill once it reaches the Supreme Court. So you're very right when you say that absolutely, like, zero amount of compensation is currently being given. I mean, compassion, yes, well and good, but there are a lot of loopholes. Not loopholes, there are a lot of lacunae in this bill which needs to be addressed and covered, or someone needs to come up with some sort of a practical solution that could, overcome these lacunae.
So why don't you tell us a little more about the kind of law that US has compared to Indian law that we are trying to have?
Okay, sure. So in the US, it's actually, there are different states have different takes on surrogacy. So there are certain states that legalize surrogacy. So for example, California is one of the most surrogacy friendly states. So maximum amount of surrogacy is contracts are implemented and enforced in California. So you have a lot of couples who actually fly down to California to commission the surrogate and have a baby via surrogacy. Then there are certain states that prohibit surrogacy. There are certain states that criminalize surrogacy. So when you're talking about the state of New York, so the state of New York prohibits surrogacy. So you cannot have a legally enforceable surrogacy contract. So actually how it works in the US is of course a very surrogacy friendly country. So even in those countries, those states, sorry, of the United States which do not have a law dealing with surrogacy, it's not completely prohibited. Whereas also there are certain states that say that surrogacy contract is void, but a lot of the advocates and the attorneys there have found a way around that. So I'll give you one example. So you like you know how I explained that the surrogate mother as well as the commissioning parents, they enter into a surrogacy contract. So in those states that say that a surrogacy contract will not be enforceable, they have found a way to go around that by entering into something called a memorandum of understanding, which is, while not enforceable, it still has some sort of an implication in terms of putting down the rights of the surrogate child, of the surrogate, as well as of the intending parents. So also another example is, so the attorneys in those states who cannot implement or cannot help draft a surrogacy contract because it is either prohibited or criminalized in those states to enter into a surrogacy contract will say something like, okay, we advised our client to do so and so, or we advised our client to go to some other country. So as long as, you know, another state of the United States, which is a surrogacy friendly state. So that is how the US is working around this. California, like I said, is the most surrogacy-friendly state of the United States. There are states that specifically allow for surrogacy of the LGBTQ community. So it's definitely not as regressive as the bill that we have in India right now. There is no bar. I have not come across any state law that says that altruistic surrogacy is restricted to family members or restricted to people of a particular age, or that they have one child, all of which is there in the Indian bill. So in terms of how elastic the definition of altruistic is, it's much, much, much more wide in the US, because of which it is much easier. So you have so many friends of the intending couple bearing children for them, and they have some sort of way to work that relationship out. So, you know, you are, I mean, of course, you're indebted to them for the rest of your life, and compassion and all of those things that the Indian government is arguing. But other than that, there are a lot of other ways in which they compensate them. You know, we actually came across examples when we were conducting this, when we were doing this research, like I said, we came across a lot of military couples who said that, you know, we're not doing this for money. We're doing this because our husbands are away, and they're like, you know, they're deployed in some other country. I love having children. I enjoy the process of pregnancy, and which is why I am happy to do this for someone else. But then again, we interviewed some other surrogate mothers who said that they were in need of money, and they were doing this because it's an easy way to earn money. Like a stay-at-home mom, there is no better, I would not say no better way, but that suited her. It worked for her, that, you know, she would bear the child for someone else who's not related to her. So maybe emotionally it wouldn't cause as much turmoil to her it would have had it been her own egg. And she's making money out of it, and like, you know, she's helping, like, you know, whatever money needs she has, she's being able to satisfy her children's needs and all of those things. So the surrogacy laws in the United States are much more friendly, both in terms of allowing intending and commissioning parents to have a baby via surrogacy, as well as in terms of protecting the rights of the surrogates. So, I mean, while I absolutely understand the, you know, the intention of the Indian government to protect the rights of these women who they think are being exploited, I also feel like by restricting, like I've been like harping on this the entire time, that by restricting the definition of the altruistic surrogacy, it's going to be very problematic, and I can't even imagine how exactly it's going to play out in practicality.
So I was checking some news articles to prepare for this, and I saw some very interesting news which says that there are women who are right now rushing to get their last chance to earn this 4 lakhs or 5 lakh rupees through doing surrogacy in India, and many
Absolutely.
are coming. Yeah, and like one more thing that is happening is that Russia, Georgia, and Ukraine have emerged as major hubs for surrogacy, and they are benefiting hugely from India stopping commercial surrogacy. The same has happened across Asia. Actually, in Thailand, they have in 2015 banned commercial surrogacy, and while Cambodia has no law related to surrogacy, there were thriving clinics in Cambodia because of the, again, of a cheaper cost, and foreign doctors were coming and practicing surrogacy related practices. But it seems that they have also recently cracked down on the same. So we are seeing a trend across the world where there are countries which are becoming anti-surrogacy kind of. I think India's law could be described as anti-surrogacy law rather than a surrogacy law. And similarly, it has happened in Thailand and Cambodia, perhaps, where they don't even have a law, but they are cracking down on it anyway. On the other hand, there are countries which are kind of intentionally becoming friendly towards surrogacy. Like Russia has a very permissive law and regulations for surrogacy.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you're right when you say that. Where I wouldn't call it anti-surrogacy, it's definitely a very regressive bill in terms of what the bill offers. So you're right, and like you very correctly said, there is going to be a huge um, flux of people moving to different countries, to actually have the baby via surrogacy. So let's see how it actually like plays out in practicality once the bill is passed and implemented in India.
Are there any international treaties or international thing, like, kind of understanding between countries or international law related to surrogacy, or people crossing borders for the surrogacy service? Like in the US, you said there are certain states which ban surrogacy, but it is meaningless because someone can pay a few $100, just go to another state and get it done.
So, I mean, the United Nations, the rights of the child. So there are, I mean, whereas there are treaties that govern the rights of the child as well as the rights of the mother, I mean, it really also depends a lot on how the countries decide to implement those treaties, even if they are signatories to it. So, whereas, I mean, India is a signatory to the convention, but still, their take on surrogacy has been very different. So, like I said, so I mean, they're not outrightly saying that we are against surrogacy, but they have put in certain restrictions. So that's, I think, how it works in every country. So there are in the United States also, it works in similar ways. So there are some states that are very friendly, and there are some states which say that, no, like we won't have commercial surrogacy, or we won't have surrogacy at all. So that's how it really plays out.
Okay, great. So we have a few questions that our viewers have asked. So Sarjana is asking, what are the guidelines for being a single parent through surrogacy?
Okay, so the surrogacy bill right now does not cover single parents. It is only for married couples who have been married for 5 years and who have a proven certificate of infertility. So as of now, a single parent is not eligible to commission or to have a baby via surrogacy. Okay, I'm sorry, I keep using the word commission, but it's no longer commission because it's altruistic. So a single
But
parent.
the law has not come in force. So for now, actually, single parents can have.
As of now, yes. I mean, yes. Yes, you're right. As of now, right? The last chance before the bill is passed. Yes.
Okay, so so right now, what is exactly allowed? Because I think foreigners still cannot visit India, right?
Yes. So right now we have. I know of an instance of a couple who actually had their first child.
So what exactly is allowed?
Ramanuj, I lost you there for a second.
Yeah, we are back. We are back. Please continue. Please continue.
So, I mean, I actually know by personal experience of a couple who had their first child and was unable to have their second child. She had a couple of miscarriages, and the doctors told her that she won't be able to conceive and grow a baby herself. And at that point of time, that was the entire argument against and for the surrogacy bill. So she actually went ahead and had a baby through surrogacy. So I mean, it's a really small world, and I know of someone who's had a baby through surrogacy. So it's still very prevalent. We know of a lot of other celebrities also who went in last minute, and which was their last chance to have a baby. Even from the LGBTQ community, actually, they are going ahead and doing it now before the bill is passed, because after this, I don't know if at all India is ever open to the idea whether they decriminalize 377, what happens. So even for them, this is actually the last chance that they can have a genetically related child. So actually, to go back to the question that you asked me, what are the guidelines for a single parent of a child via surrogacy? So till the bill is implemented, it's actually going to be the egg that is donated from the single mother who wishes to have a child, and a sperm that is taken from a bank and put, and the embryo being put into a surrogate. So that's, I mean, there are no guidelines as such right now. There is nothing that governs it right now. So for a single parent, she would just have to have a sperm donor, and then continue with the normal process of how the surrogacy happens.
All right. So, Ayushmita, I think we have covered quite a bit of ground with respect to surrogacy laws. And do you have any parting message before you finish the session?
No message really, but it was really great talking to you, and I hope I was able to give all those people who had no idea about the surrogacy industry and about the laws related to surrogacy a little bit of an insight into this. And I hope I didn't bore you guys. That's all.
Not at all. I think it was quite extensive, and we have covered all the major issues around surrogacy. So somebody watches this video, they'll be able to understand. Provided, I don't know what quality video has come because of constant internet fluctuation throughout the this
I
session.
think the Bombay rains are contributing to the network. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm quite sure that's happening. So, no problem, but I think it was valuable, and thank you so much for joining us and taking out your time. And we hope to have you back another day with
Thank you
another.
so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Bye-bye.